close formation loop. It's quite a while actually since I've seen a formation aerobatic chipmunk display. Solo aeros, yes, but not in formation.
I think the last I remember were the Caledonian chipmunks, about 10-15 years ago.
Based up at
Scotland.
Perth, yes. Were delivered to the RAF 75 years ago this year to the Oxford University Air Squadron at Kidlington. And this type is still on RAF charge because the Battle of Britain Memorial flight at RAF Coningsby has 2 of these aircraft for tail dragger conversion and refresher purposes. In fact, there are chipmunks on the strength of all 3 of the historic flights, the military historic flights in Britain.
And even in its primary role, certainly with university air squadrons and air experience flights, stayed in service to the end of the 1990s. I mean, that's the incredible record.
Yeah, 1996 was when the final ones were retired by the AES, at that stage in favour of the Scottish Aviation Bulldog, which also replaced them with the University Air Squadron. And then, of course, now we have got Peter in this role. And then was still in service with the Army Air Corps until 1997 with the RAF Gatow station flight in what was then West Berlin. The Allies had the right to fly around the Berlin control zone, and they used the opportunity for reconnaissance with various helicopters with the yellow training bands and the later red and white.
Indeed, the red and white for me is the sort of real characteristic colour scheme for this aircraft.
Farnborough back in the 1950s, and there were later several display teams of them in the British military, the Blue Chips and the Skylarks in the RAF, and later my favourite was the Grey Owls of the Army Air Corps, so named because of the age of the pilots, who include some incredibly distinguished test pilots carrying on flying but performing basic flying grading for the Army.
As was of course done on the air experience flights, of which this aircraft was a stalwart, obviously, where so many retired air officers would see out their careers instructing, taking cadets for their first experience. You sit next to Flying Officer Smith and you realise, no, he's Air Vice Marshal.
Yeah. I mentioned how it's still used by the BBMF, the Chipmunk organisation, from the Civil Aviation Authority. He was aged just 20 when he got his first DA. He's now got several hundred hours on Chipmunks and must be one of the most seasoned Chipmunk display pilots in the country. And you'll see they're staying in close formation, but a wonderful display in the present day.
So again, we just have a couple of moments. We're going to move a few aircraft as soon as the Chipmunks have vacated. We have the Dutch Spitfire to get airborne. And then we have the Beech 18. That's a nice 2 takeoffs there together. That's going to look very, very nice. And then we'll follow that up with the next display item at around about 10:02, which will be the mighty Royal Air Force F-35B.
Yes, I can see the Dutch Spitfire on the runway, and as Andy said, this is going to be followed off by the Royal Netherlands Air Force historic flight Beech 18, which is the support aircraft for the Spitfire. I have not seen this aircraft in the UK with the historic flight before, but I know it did come to Britain in its former ownership with the Dutch Dakota Association back in 1988. I don't think it's been over since then, so this is a real rarity. It's not displaying, it's heading back to the Netherlands via a stop at Terweston near Silverstone, before then proceeding on with the Spitfire to the historic flights base at Hills Orion. But we will of course see the Spitfire back with us for a solo.
Well, we'd like to thank our sponsors and supporters here at the RAF Cosford Air Display this year, and we'd particularly like to thank our main sponsors today, Lockheed Martin. But thanks, as I say, to our other supporters, BAE, RTX, Leonardo, Rolls-Royce, Stratstone Jaguar, Wenlock Water, Ford, Adventure 001 and Boardroom Gaming Cafe. Thanks to all our sponsors and supporters, we really appreciate you, and we also appreciate the cadets from UBAS who've been providing hospitality.
The Beech 18 cleared for takeoff as well in World War years, used by the RAF, notably with Southeast Asia Command, but also elsewhere as the expediter. Rather similar in some ways, I suppose you could say, to our own Ambro Hansen and the Beech 18, or the C-45 as it was known to the US Army Air Forces. Useful in all sorts of crew training roles. There was, for example, a dedicated bombing trainer, the AT-11 Kansan, of which there's one airworthy in Germany. And here's the Royal Netherlands Air Force historic flight example on the Beech 18 on takeoff.
So now we are looking ahead to the next item, which will be the mighty F-35B. Not a full display, I hasten to add. This will be a break into the circuit, into the hover, and then a departure, but it will still be very spectacular, and above all, it will be very
One thing that's interesting about these aircraft, they can be equipped with both of the standard air-to-air refueling systems, namely probe and drogue and the flying boom system, enabling maximum operational flexibility. And there it is for this very rare appearance out to our left, the NATO multinational multi-role tanker unit, Airbus A330.
First for Cosford. Now you can see the probe has been extended. Here in the UK we tend to favour a different way. We use the probe and drogue as opposed to the flying boom that you see here. This aircraft capable of using both methods to refuel.
Now we stick with Dutch contributions to today's show. For our next aeroplane comes courtesy of the Royal Netherlands Air Force historic flight, but it allows us to go back almost exactly 81 years to D-Day, the 6th of June 1944, when the Supermarine Spitfire 9 with serial Mike Kilo 732 was in service with number 485 Squadron of the Royal New Zealand Air Force. On the 6th of June, D-Day itself, it was being flown by Pilot Officer Herb Patterson. And on that momentous day, it achieved a half share.
What crop?
Positioning now for its last manoeuvre from the Royal Netherlands Air Force historic flight, the Spitfire.
An incredible survivor, not just because of all of those combat operations, it undertook towards the end of World War II, but also from what happened after it, because it was used as an airfield decoy for a time at Eindhoven, and then number 14 Squadron of the RAF, quote, liberated it. If you heard Juice's interview with Jonathan that we put out before the show, other terms are available for what happened to the aircraft, but they liberated it and took it to their base at Oldenburg and then to Gütersloh, and it ended up coming back in an RAF short Belfast to Brize Norton in 1969. All sorts of moves in the UK. The Battle of Britain Memorial Flight used that airframe for spares usage for a time, but then in 1984 it went back to the Netherlands, and Pete Kinsey, the famous British warbird pilot, flew it again in 1993, and the Dutch government then took whole ownership of the aircraft the following year, and it is splendid. Another Spitfire colour scheme.